Hello and welcome to this InterBaseXE7 video. This is an introduction to ChangeViews, and this is an abstract taken from our CodeReg 9 product address for Interbase. So enjoy. Okay, so let's talk about ChangeViews. ChangeViews, I'm just going to give you a few minutes context on them, and then we'll get into a really cool demo looking at these in action. So what is a ChangeView? Well, a ChangeView is a subscription-based model that allows you to subscribe to data, and through those subscriptions you're then able to identify what has changed since you started your subscription to the data. Subscriptions can run either during a transaction or spanning connections and time. So once you start a database transaction, you can then be working with your subscription, you can disconnect from the database, you can reconnect up with a new transaction at a point in time in the future, you can then activate your subscription, and then you can then find out what has changed in the database in the meantime. Now, every subscriber to the database can have multiple devices that they subscribe to the database. Each device basically is an endpoint that you want to have a managed point in time for your subscriptions. Now, a traditional briefcasing model, if we take each of these colors as a point in time and some changes happening, you need to download maybe 23 different data packet changes as time goes through. With ChangeViews, we're able to identify at a field level specifically what has changed and then allow you to pass only those changes down. Now, this is really important when you start thinking, if I've got a salesperson out in the field and they may be updating specifically their stock information before they go into a customer's visit, if you've just updated all the stock items with their on-hand data, and you may store a photo for that stock on the record, you don't want to be pushing the entire data down. So using ChangeViews, you can identify just specifically the elements that have changed, leave the other data behind, and that drastically reduces the time it takes to update, the speed it takes to update over cellular data as well, the performance of your applications, and most importantly as well, the cost of updating your local data. So you're able to keep in sync a lot quicker and a lot more cost effectively. And from a developer point, this is so easy to implement. So why are we getting really excited about ChangeViews here? And why would you want to use ChangeViews? Well, traditional ways of tracking changes are either with triggers or with dates. So let's start off with triggers. Triggers are very high cost at runtime. They verbose the database out by using a log table that every single subscriber who wants to track different changes to data has to have those logged. And then when you connect up, you can then find out what's changed and work your way through the change log. Now, that's great, but it's very hard to query what specifically has changed if you just want to do a quick lookup on, say, a specific table. And also, the more users you have connecting in, each with their own logging going on, the more verbose your database gets. So logging via triggers is really suited to small-scale deployments only. And with ChangeViews, we provide a near-zero database speed effect. This is logged specifically on the record within the database, and we're able to identify specifically at when time they've been changed. This has very minimal on-disk size effect, so we don't have a large log file that's going through. We have field level granularity, so we're able to identify specifically what fields have been changed, where and when. We're able to query through SQL for what fields have changed, what is the change state of the field, and get that subset of data of what's changed back as well. And it's very highly scalable. ChangeViews has the same cost on a database as a single, from 1 user to 1,000 users. With date fields are rather verbose. You have to add extra columns to your database just to be able to track changes. They can increase then obviously disk usage, They become exceptionally complex to manage, especially if you want to retrofit them into an application later. You need to plan them up front to make sure that your queries are all working up front. And also, if you have multiple fields in the database that are just there storing redundant data, that becomes complexity that you need to manage as well. Date fields provide issues around simultaneous users updating data. You either have to block users sequentially from writing their entire block of changes, so when they go and ask for the changes that have happened since a specific point in time, they get back the things they should be getting, which is not particularly good in high volume areas. Or you run risks around dates being wrong and missing data. Also, it's very hard to identify what you knew about, so you don't end up pulling your own data changes back to yourself as well. With ChangeViews, you're able to identify specifically what you have put into the database, so they're not sent back to you automatically. If you want to connect in and make them changes anonymously, then you will get those changes back if you need to. But why move that data back if you've made the changes? There's no meta changes that you need to make to the specific tables by adding fields or columns or triggers to track changes. Very, very easy to manage either before or after, and you can query them as you go through to find out what has changed at runtime. So hopefully that's kind of whetted your appetite for ChangeViews. I'm now going to hand over to our principal lead engineer, Shriram, who's going to take us through ChangeViews.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm going to take the time just to quickly demo the ChangeView feature. And I thought what better than taking our sample database and trying to implement ChangeView on top of it. My name is Sriram Balasubramanian, and I am the engineering team lead for InterBase. And today we are going to walk through setting up subscription in a simple use case scenario and seeing how we can fetch changed record information from the database. So here, just quickly put together a story. Say for a startup CEO who's using the an employee database, and the CEO might be interested in looking at or subscribing to changes in certain tables. So they want to make sure that they are looking at key information within the database that's changed without having to implement a lot of any database schema changes. They are just going to be identifying assets that they want to track and setting up subscriptions on them. So subsequently, when the CEO is actually going ahead and fetching the information, they just get notified about the changed data rather than being bombarded with the hundreds or thousands of or millions of records that are existing in those tables. So some of the goals for the user, in this case the CEO, is to track changes on customer accounts. That's in employee.gdb, it's tracked as a customer table. Track changes related to any employee information. Employees are key asset in the company, and any kind of changes that happen for the employee records are important as well. The CEO, since it's a startup company, is also interested in making sure that sales are occurring consistently and orders are getting shipped to customers. And then, of course, they may also be interested in checking out any department relocation decisions that have happened since they last checked into the data. So that's just basically a set of stories that I sort of pulled in together. And now we are going to see how we are going to set that up in the employee database. In our demo, we are essentially going to go through and set up the subscriptions using the script. And then subsequently, we have a case where the CEO has 3 different devices that they're using with this common database. On one device, we're just naming the 3 devices as laptop, tablet, and phone. And the idea behind this demo is to show that irrespective of where they're using the application, if they connect back to the same common database on a remote server, they're going to be fetching information on that device that they have that they want to refresh from the last time that they used that device. So that's what they're interested in looking at, all the changes on that particular device since they last refreshed the information. So we have specific helper scripts out there that we have put together for this demo. There are two categories of scripts. One is to check for changes from a particular device or destination, as we call them. And another script is just to make changes from that device. So if the changes are being run from one device, you should be able to use the other device and say, okay, what were the changes since I last checked on this particular device? So we are going to be going through the steps to make sure that initially you go ahead and set up your subscription, fetch your data for the first time, in which case you will be getting all of the data. And then subsequently, any checks for changes will return you only information that has been changed since you last refreshed on that device. So let's go ahead and set up the database. Running the run setup information script. And what this script does is it just basically restores your sample employee backup file into a new database. It just restores the database and then sets up subscription on specific assets. If we look at the setup, what we have done here is we have identified, since the CEO is interested in subscribing to different changes in the database, we have identified all the assets that they are interested in subscribing to. So we are using the create subscription command and giving it a name. The subscription can be any name that you want to define. Of course, it shares the namespace with other entities in the database. But in this case, we have named it as subscription CEO multi-device. And it's setting up a subscription on employee for row insert, update, delete. So essentially here we are saying we want to be notified of any change to this table, whether it's an insert, update, or a delete clause. Likewise, for customer records, in the sales table, the CEO is interested in only checking for updates, especially for orders that have just been shipped or have been shipped since the last time they checked for data. And then, of course, as you noticed, you can also mention table names with specific columns or set of columns that you're interested in rather than the whole table. In this particular use case, we are saying the CEO is interested in location changes on table department. And of course, the descriptions are always helpful to know what kind of subscriptions are available in the database. So if you're a developer or an administrator, you can set up all of the subscriptions and people can then start using those subscriptions. What we do see here is you do have to provide a grant subscribe clause to certain users. In this case, in this use case, we just have a single user in the database, which is this DBA. And you do have to grant subscribe to users that you may want to use the subscription. So if you have more than the sysdba, which is very typical, databases do contain a lot of database users. So you can subscribe selectively who gets to use the subscription in their applications. So now that we have set up this database with a subscription, we can go ahead and start using it. One of the first things that you would do in your database is from your application, when you selectively connect to a subscription or use a subscription, you may want to use, you will have to use the set subscription clause as part of the ChangeView feature. So what you're deciding to do in this particular script is set the subscription active on that particular device. And this is a subscription that you just created, that was created for you, and you have been granted access. So you come in from a different session and say, I want to use this subscription now. and the device that I am activating the subscription for is my tablet. You have a similar, you have to identify your application from which device you are coming in. Of course, this is optional. If you do not give a device or a destination, as we call them, then the subscription is sort of tracked for that user, and you won't be able to distinguish between from one device to the other. Anytime you execute a query, you will only get changes from the last time you refresh on any device. But if you want to track it per device, you can go ahead and give the @ clause. Just as a comparison, in this particular SQL script, we do have the device identified as a tablet. We do have another SQL script where the device is identified as a phone. You could have a device which is identified as a laptop. So you can track subscriptions on each device uniquely. But if you did not want to do that, if you just wanted to track it for your user, you just don't provide the @ destination clause. So as we have noticed in this SQL script, you do activate the subscription that you want to use. And from this point onwards, any query that you execute on the tables where we have set up subscription, you will get only changes that have been done to that particular set of records in that table. The first time you ever execute this set subscription command for the subscription that you have been granted, you will get all the records. And the reason for this is the database has to have some initialization of your subscription. Basically, it has to know that from a particular destination or for a particular user, this is where it starts or needs to start tracking changes. So the first time you do execute any of these queries in an active subscription, you're going to get all the records. But subsequently, when you keep running the same query within new activations of the same device or the destination, you will only see changes. So let's go ahead and run our scenario of this. So in my case, I just go ahead and have 3 different devices as 3 different windows. And I'm going to show you, I'm considering that this is my laptop, and this is my tablet, and this is my phone device, just for illustration. So on my laptop, I will go ahead and run check changes from laptop. So what does this script do? What the script does is it will go ahead and run a similar SQL like what you're seeing for the tablet here, but for the laptop. I can just go ahead and do that. So just like I mentioned previously, you're going to identify your laptop as a device where you would want to initialize your subscription, and then go ahead and select all the data. The first time you do this, you're going to get all of the records. Of course, there's just a bunch of records, so you end up getting all of the records, as we noticed, because we are not putting any conditional clause on or selective filtering of any of the data. You're just going ahead and selecting all of the records. Now you can think of a client server over a WAN or a LAN where there might be bandwidth restrictions, and you're still going ahead and getting all of these records the first time around. But subsequent runs of this query is going to get you only changes that have happened since, like in this particular case, we ran it for the laptop. If we run the same script another time, we don't get any records back, because now your subscription has been set, a flag post has been set the first time you ran it, and subsequently when you run the same script once again, you're not getting any records because there have been no changes that have been done to the tables that you're interested in or that you're subscribed to. So we will go ahead and run the same. When I say the same, we are going to check for changes on a tablet, and since we are running it for the first time on the tablet, we are going to get a similar set of all the records against that database. And we will do the same against the phone as well. And the first time the application runs with the subscriptions active on the phone, it set a flag post for the phone as well. So subsequent runs is going to show you only changes, just like what we saw on the laptop. Now the next step in this process, of course, would be for us to go ahead and implement some changes, actually. So as part of a demo, what we have just gone through right now is initializing our subscriptions on each of the device where we are interested in, and checking for changes initially. So you have got all the records and there are no changes to report at this point. Over the course of time, someone might actually change some data which you are going to be notified about. So let's go ahead and run the first part of the demo where we implement a change on the laptop. And when we implement the change on the laptop, of course, the laptop application or the destination is the one that's run through the change. So it's not going to be notified itself that it's done some changes when it looks up for changed information. But if you run the same queries on tablet and on phone, you're going to be now notified what changes happened on the tables that you're subscribed to. So first we are going to run the changes on the laptop. So the changes on the laptop, what does it do? If we look at the change, this is what the laptop's application or the destination application does. In this case, the laptop is going to connect to the database in question, and it's going to make some very rudimentary changes. It's going to move an employee. This particular application moves an employee from one department to another. So they're being moved to, the employee is being moved to department number 671 with the sample data. Then it goes ahead and we also update an employee's salary and give them a 5%, the employee gets a 5% raise. And then it goes ahead and commits the data. Now, of course, notice that in this case, the laptop is the one that actually makes the laptop application is the one that makes the changes. So subsequently, when the laptop application or destination device selects from these tables, it's not going to be notified that there are any changes that it needs to consume because it was the one that made the changes. But if you do run the select query from the tablet or the phone, you are now going to be notified of changes in the employee table, right? Because the employee was moved from one department to another, and some other employee got a salary change. You're going to see those changes here. So let's go ahead and run the change script on the laptop, and we'll see based on the output, we will see what this particular SQL does, as we just noticed. We are basically updating the employees department to 671 right there. And we are going ahead and also updating the employee's salary with a 5% raise. Of course, if we now say the CEO is now using his tablet to check for changes that have happened in the database since they last checked for changes, the tablet is just going to quickly notify you based on, because that's a destination device where you're subscribing and you're setting a subscription to active. And now you get only, even though you execute select on all of the records with an employee, your subscription window is now active. So you're going to only see the changes that have happened in the tables that you're subscribed to. So even though you do a select all records from employee, you're just going to be notified of the 2 records that are actually changed. Now, if you do change your destination, say you do bring up your phone and run the same application, the phone is also going to be notified because it's now moving its subscription flag post from what it did refresh earlier on, and now it's going to be notified of the changes. Now, there's a special clause that I want to mention out here. Since you are activating a subscription and looking for only changes in the tables that you're subscribed to, once you do commit your transaction, your subscription snapshot has now moved forward. So any subsequent runs of the same query is not going to notify you anymore about the changes. Those changes have already been consumed by the application. Now, the relevancy out here, of course, is your application can only work on the change data and you can do something with it. But the more important thing out here also is that you can set up your subscription such that bandwidth consumption is to a minimum. and you don't have to select all of the records or implement any schema changes to track changes within the table. All you do is set up your subscriptions, and Interbase will notify you of all change data. So now, of course, as we mentioned earlier on, since the laptop is the one that actually made this changes to the records, if you run check for changes on the laptop, you're not going to be notified of any changes because you're the one who actually made the changes. Now we can just move forward to another device and run other changes that say you want to do on your tablet. Now, what does the tablet do? It selectively modifies some additional information in the database, right? It goes ahead and changes the department location for department number 180. And it moves it, the change was that the department moved to Austin, Texas. Now, of course, you made this change on the tablet, but the laptop and the phone application have not yet refreshed those changes. So if you run your check changes on the phone, now the phone is going to only get the specific changes that were supposed to be submitted to the phone because it was just refreshing your subscriptions. Likewise, if the CEO runs the same application on the laptop, they're now going to see that something else changed in. So irrespective of whatever application or destination device they use, they're always going to see the changes since the last time they refreshed the data on that particular destination device. Just for illustration, we'll go ahead and run some changes on the phone as well. And the phone makes modifications to other assets that you're tracking. In this case, you may remember from our story earlier on that we wanted to also track order status. If a particular order did get shipped, then that should be coming up in the list of changes that the CEO is interested in. So as you can notice in this particular test script, we are making changes to an underlying table, sales table, and this particular order has been shipped on this date. Now, of course, between the time, you could have a number of orders that have been shipped since the last time the application was used on a different device. And when you do look up for changes, it's going to show you a list of all the orders that have been shipped since the time you last refreshed. Now, of course, on the phone, you have made a change and you have shipped an order from here. And if you look for changes on the tablet, you're going to now be notified that the order did indeed ship. Now, you will notice in this case, there's in iSQL, along with having a set changes clause, which indicates to iSQL that it needs to print some additional information about what the change was. You'll notice that the change was essentially updating the status of that particular PO order to shipped, and at the same time, it also notifies you that the change was actually an update in the ship date column. So it does put in a new date when the order was shipped, and it also notifies you what was the change that actually changed on that record. So you can see over time in Interbase's versioning or multi-generation architecture is in the background, we are keeping track of all the states that implemented a change in that record version. And you only get notified if you subscribe to that particular state change. So you may remember when you set up the subscriptions, you mentioned that you're not only interested in updates on sales table, right? So if someone went ahead and ordered, inserted a bunch of data to the sales table, that's not going to show up in your change list because you're not interested in the new orders in the sales table. You're just interested in updates in the sales table. So you can selectively mention what states you're interested in your subscription, whether it's new records, updates to existing records, or deleted records. In some cases, you may want to track deletes where you have lost some data inadvertently, or you have lost some customer information or anything of the sort on the table, and you can selectively put in a subscription for deleted records. So the next time you refresh for deleted records, you will be notified that those records are indeed deleted, and only those. So here we did make a change to the ship order status, and going back to the laptop window, if you do run check changes on the laptop, you're going to be notified of what change happened. And you will notice that the other two queries, or when you're querying for information from employee and customers, you don't get any results set back because there were no changes in those tables since you last refreshed on the laptop. But there have been changes to the sales records and what the change was. All right. So we did walk through a very simple use case of what ChangeView and subscription setup can help you achieve, and how easy it is to go ahead and set up a subscription on top of an existing database. And you can selectively, very selectively, you can either subscribe to changes on the whole, on all of the records for any kind of change, or you can selectively go ahead and apply for a subscription for specific columns that have either changed as an insert or as an update or as a delete. You can choose your states and you can choose your columns if you so choose to do that, or you can just select, go ahead and say, I'm interested in all kinds of changes on this table. And as long as you're granted to use that subscription, it will just help you reduce any kind of bandwidth consumption, and also specifically provide you data that you're interested in, rather than having to define filters or make any schema changes in your database. So that is just a short and a single use case where multiple devices are used by one particular user.